Hey Revolutionaries, I'm excited to bring you this week's episode with Katie Krimitsos, who's the founder of PodFest, and we're talking podcasting and community building. You know, Chris is an amazing guy, amazing speaker, and he's really become an expert these days in the long-form type of content like podcasting and YouTube and Facebook Live and those kinds of things. Can't wait for you guys to listen to the episode. But before we get there, you know, I wanted to mention again that I thought 2019 was going to be a revolutionary year for all of us. And, you know, it's starting to come to fruition. And I just wanted to mention today that just yesterday, we signed the agreement. I have a sponsor who's joining Jim's Ambassador Program for 2019. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Now, I know you guys don't know what the Ambassador Program is or what that means, but, you know, the reason I mention it is that it's new for 2019, you know, trying a few new things for the podcast. Got to keep reinventing the podcast as I go, as I reinvent myself here. But, you know, I think it's really the right flavor in terms of starting to work with a sponsor. You know, I've considered, you know, doing affiliate marketing and other advertising type of things that you can do with podcasts, but I want to remain focused on listeners and creating value, and so I finally figured out a way that I can start working with people that want to work with me. So, you know, I do consulting and coaching and stuff behind the scenes here, and I think this flavor of the programs is going to work well for everybody. So the people listening out there will begin to know the company that I'm talking about, and they'll get to learn about the founding entrepreneur of the company or companies that she's founded. She's an amazing woman, and this particular company that she's starting the sponsorship out with is a worldwide operation. It's really cool stuff. You know, the reason I decided to partner with her is because, you know, she's embracing, you know, reinventing her own brand right now. She's going through a brand update, and she's reaching out and embracing the new technologies and looking at all the new ways that you can communicate. And she's got an amazing backstory, amazing story of she's already been through a few reinventions, you know, growing up in the Philippines and coming to the U.S. and moving around the world and doing business all around the world. I mean, really, it's very inspiring to me, and she's a great fit for Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, so I love that part. And then on the client side, in terms of the Ambassador Program, you know, I'll be able to work with her and share my experience with her and share my network with her, etc., all the value that I can bring to her behind the scenes as part of the program. So if anyone out there is listening is a potential sponsor and wants to learn more information about what the Ambassador Program means, you know, just get in contact with me. You can tweet at me or send me an email. You know, check out the website, jimsreinventionrevolution.com for contact info. But you know what? That's all I'm going to say right now. I just wanted to get that out there. I'm super excited to start working with her. Oh, and I'm excited that, you know, because she's doing the sponsorship, that I'm going to be able to put that support back into the show, which will benefit everybody. And speaking of the show, let's get to the show, okay? Stop talking, Jim. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. All right, everybody, let's get ready to listen to Katie Krimitsos. Make sure you get your tickets for PodFest this year, coming up in March in Orlando. But right now, let's get to the episode. Here we go.
Welcome to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, the show that explores reinvention in the digital age as it relates to career, creativity, and technology. Stay tuned for interviews with professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives that have reimagined success and are making a pivot. If you'd like to listen to the entire back catalog, visit jimsreinventionrevolution.com for instant access. And now, here's your host, Jim.
Hey everybody, this is Jim, and welcome to episode 47 of Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. I'm talking today with Katie Krimitsos, and we're talking podcasting and community building. So, Chris, welcome to the revolution.
Jim, thanks for having me on.
Hey, well, I really appreciate you being here and dialing in. And as we dig into things, the first thing I want to ask you, which has been like on my mind since I saw you post it on, I think it was Facebook, or you did a Facebook Live about it, was what were you doing at Harvard, and what did it have to do with podcasting?
So a good friend of mine, Elsie Escobar, connected me with a young gentleman trying to do a conference on Harvard Square, and he is a educator on the campus. So he was trying to bring all the EDU people together through a podcasting conference. And luckily for him, he pulled it off. He went after all these big podcasters, but the only one that agreed to be part of the conference was the hardcore history guy.
Okay, Dan Carlin.
Yes, thank you. Dan Carlin, who's a legend.
Yes.
And then basically after that, all these other professors that have huge podcasts agreed to be on it. And it was a revolutionary moment in time in that these EDU professors came together to free the information from their institution by putting them on these podcasts. And many of them are heavily researched, heavily studied kind of podcasts with maybe, in a year, they might release 8 episodes for the season.
I see.
But they average, a lot of them average 20, 30, 40, 50,000 downloads per episode, because it might be like the history of ancient Greece or Rome, and they're freeing up this information for the world. So it was a really revolutionary conference, and I was really proud to be able to consult and speak at it.
Wow, that's really interesting. So is this, obviously a lot of universities have curriculum online, you can take courses online, et cetera, but is this an initiative from these kinds of professors to, basically kind of do it on their own volition and kind of give it away for free?
Pretty much what's happening is the professors are leading the charge, and then the colleges are saying to the professor, let's say each campus has a couple of professors interested in this.
Yeah.
The colleges are saying, hey, lead the charge, and then let us know what we need to do. We want to support it. We want to be part of it. So they're allowing the professors to experiment and then bring it back. But what a lot of people don't know, Jim, is like Harvard has specialized information that if you're not part of the university system, you have to kind of get access to their library, of contents, or Princeton, or a lot of these Ivy Leagues have been around now for hundreds of years. So these professors or these academics are literally taking that information, making it easy to understand via podcasting, and then releasing it to the public. And, as you know, podcasting is free, so there's no barrier to entry. That's the revolutionary part. They're freeing up a lot of these things by telling great stories and putting them out to the world.
Right. Well, man, it's so interesting, and it just fits, the concept of the show here, the reinvention revolution. I feel like, obviously education, everything is out there. There's a lot of information online these days, and the universities are kind of probably feeling the pinch a little bit. I think it's fascinating that these leading institutions are allowing their professors to lead the way. It's really pretty cool, because they know they need to kind of reinvent themselves probably going forward, Just, I think about the influence and the things you can learn and the ways you can monetize and make money these days. A university degree used to be that ticket, especially in the 20th century, but going forward, it's probably a mix of things, So very interesting.
Yeah, it was cool that they sponsored it. Zack Davis put it on, and he was the spearheading of it. And then the Harvard School of Divinity, which is one of the oldest parts of Harvard campus, because, Harvard, all these schools started out of the religious area for the most part back then. And he got full support from the team. They helped him put it on, but he's the one that had to sell tickets. He had to get sponsorships to cover quite a few of the costs. So I give him a lot of credit for what he did. And I think there was 400 people from around the country. A lot of them, like I said, through the university system, and some students came together. So it was really... It's a really cool event, I have to tell you. It was really, some of the breakouts were not for me. They were like really academic.
Right.
To where they started talking about like my thesis and this and that. That's not my cup of tea.
Right.
But what is my cup of tea is they're unlocking a vault of knowledge and releasing it to the public by storytelling and narrative. And that's the key. They're making it not just accessible, they're making it interesting for people to want to tap in and listen and find out what's going on.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I was really curious about wow, what are they doing and what are universities doing with podcasting? I knew some of, professors had started doing that, but I think people are realizing the impact and the power and the community that these podcasts can start building, around, all these niche different topics. I mean, it makes me think about, I'm just about, a couple of weeks away from heading to Thailand for some business conferences and some vacation and stuff. But I have a good friend of mine who's a college professor at Thammasat University in Bangkok, and he's also the host of the Bangkok podcast. He's co-host this year. So I'm going to be talking to him about what I just learned and ask if they're doing some things like that in Southeast Asia these days. So very interesting. Cool. Well, speaking about community, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. And because you have been an expert over these last, at least 10 years, probably building community as I get to know you a little better and looking back into your background. So we should tell people that, you've been our co-founder of PodFest that happens in Orlando, Florida every year. Is that right? I want to make sure I get this right.
I founded PodFest 5 or 6 years ago. And then last year, I brought on a shareholder in John Dennis.
Okay.
As part of the team. So
gotcha. Okay.
He's part owner, but I founded it years ago out of my Tampa Bay Business Owners in Tampa, Florida.
Okay. Well, great. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk about that association, the Tampa Bay Business Owners Association, which you created, and it's a little bit, I guess, selfish question or focus for me on this podcast, but I think it's great for people that are listening here that. Probably I have a little bit of a bigger audience in Cleveland because that's where I live locally. And in Cleveland these days, they're trying to focus on blockchain and turning Cleveland into Blockland. So we just had a technical conference in early December called Blockland. It was sold out. It was over 1,000 or 1,200 people there, major speakers. But the community is starting to build behind this blockchain technology and kind of choosing themselves, the Cleveland area is like, hey, we can be experts in this. We can be a center of expertise for this. And so I want the audience to hear how have you been able to do this for the Tampa Bay Business Association, but also for podcasting in general, and really choosing to, leverage these new technologies, bring people together, and, realize the opportunities that it brings. So how did you get started putting these organizations together, and why you?
Well, when I first moved to Tampa, Florida, coming from New York, I had a family structure that took care of me. And what I mean by that is that if I needed a job, I would literally put the word out to my relatives and they would refer me into a place or say, hey, so-and-so's cousin works at this corporation. He could get you in. So I didn't realize this, but I had this network of people, right, relatives and friends that could help me with opportunities.
Right.
And when I moved to Tampa, there was no network. So I realized very quickly that I'm not the only one moving to Tampa. There's a lot of other people that moved down here. And there was a missing piece in that small business owners didn't have a place to connect to. There was chambers of commerces, but what would happen when you go to a chamber is a salesperson would seek you out and try and sell you their products.
Right.
So I figured, what if we had something that was for business owners? In order to join, you had to be a business owner. You couldn't be a salesperson. And it was peer-minded. So we started Tampa Bay Business Owners, 20, 30 people, and each year it doubled in size, so it got to 300 people in yearly membership. And I did over 2,000 events over a 10-year period of time, but I learned a lot about community, about building camaraderie amongst individuals, and that's when Steve Cherubino came to our one of our little meetups, and he talked about podcasting. And that was in August of 2013. I went home and I told my wife, hey, I want to start podcasting. And she said, well, I want to do a podcast too. And we had a consultant that said, you both can't start a podcast. You're doing about 150 events a year. Something's going to break if you both start podcasting. And Katie had a better topic than I did. And her topic was Biz Women Rock. She wanted to podcast, interview business women. And at the time, I know this is going to sound crazy, but just 4 or 5 years ago, there wasn't maybe one or two, if that, business podcast for business women. So when Katie launched, it was the #1 show for the 8 weeks she was in what we call back then iTunes New and Noteworthy. It was a big deal at the time.
Right.
And it got her thousands of people that started listening to her show, and she built a really cool base. And that's when in 2014 I did 2 large workshops, one in Sarasota, one in Tampa, about a month apart from each other. About 75 to 100 people attended each one. And then that next year we organized it and created PodFest. And then PodFest doubled in size from 100 to 181 people, let's be exact.
Okay.
And then I moved it to Orlando. And when I moved it to Orlando, it doubled again to just under 400. And then this past year, we were just under 600. And I brought on John as a partner so he could help grow a lot of the interactive internet side of things, because with these conferences, as they grow, you need a lot of help on the tech stuff.
Sure.
And John was able to bring that side of the equation to help. So we're going to hit about 1,000 attendees at this year's PodFest. But it's really, it's grown. But the key, Jim, is, as you said, it's knowing your community members. It's caring about them. When you see them at other conferences, making sure to reach out to them. And building that, bond and community. So I will from time to time reach out to people that are in the community, call them, see how they're doing, and build up that relationship.
Well, I'm glad you're sharing some of this stuff, because I'm still thinking, like, if we rewind back to those days where you're first putting together the Tampa Bay Business Owners Association, what were the tools that you had to do it? Because that's 10 some years ago. I mean, was Facebook really a thing back then? How did you start getting the word out? Were you like mailing or just emailing people?
So I didn't have, one of the funny stories early on, I had a small budget and I used it to bring in speakers, and then I had no money. Okay. So one of the speakers was J Conrad Levinson. He was the author of Guerrilla Marketing. Stroked him a $13,500 check for a 60-minute keynote.
Yikes. Wow.
He came in. He had sold 25 million books. So he had outsold anyone you have ever met, basically put all their book sales together. J. Conrad Levinson had sold that many books.
Wow.
So I figured at 25 million books, he's going to pack the room. I realized really quickly, very few people knew who he was, so I had to educate this audience, but I had spent all my money on marketing. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, not marketing, bringing him in thinking that would be the marketing.
Right. So you thought that would be the marketing, but it wasn't working out.
Yeah, so what we did is we had no money. So I went into the Barnes & Noble. I basically picked all the top leadership authors everybody has heard of. Warren Buffett, Robert Kiyosaki, Tony Robbins. I piled all their books on my left hand. And then I picked up all of J. Conrad Levinson's books and said, look, even though you see these 20 books on my left hand, these 5 books have outsold all of these combined times 5, and then I just dropped all the books and I ran out of the store as the employees tried to chase me for dropping all the books. Really? And that was interesting because I was using a guerrilla marketing strategy to advertise the man of guerrilla marketing. And it was like, hey, we're going to have J. Conrad Levinson. If you want to learn how to do this, come on down. So we were able to get 100 people in the room because that video went viral to my small group of friends. Over 326 people watched it, but it was a very targeted list of people, so they all watched it.
Okay.
So that helped me pack the room. So I learned a lot about that. And then early on, what I would do is I would give everybody individualized gifts. So when my community was small, we had like 80 members. If I went on vacation, I didn't have back then we didn't have a lot of money to even fly, so we'd do road trips, Katie and I. So I would then go buy all the postcards at the local stand, 80 of them, and they'd be like $4 for $1 or something. So I'd buy $20 worth of postcards and then mail everybody an individual message by me, and it would be very specific and wishing them a happy new year. Well, those postcards literally, I had one guy that I hadn't seen in 2 years, and he kept renewing, and it was really odd. And I would tell Rhonda, my team member, I said, Rhonda, I haven't seen Jeff in 2 years. I don't know why he keeps renewing. Mm-hmm. And he came in one day and he brings this postcard in with him and he said, these postcards keep me going. Thank you for sending them to me. And that's why I renew every year, even though I don't show up. So he was renewing a $450 membership a year to get a postcard. And remember, we started this business in 08, 09, so people needed some positivity and a message of keep going, you got greatness inside you. So it was a really cool experience. And that really created the core of the group.
I see. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I was just curious how you get it started because did you have experience in kind of building these groups previously, or you just had a notion where it's like, I need to do this? Yeah,
it was to my benefit and detriment at the same time, but I had a notion that I think I could do some of it. Right. What I know now is I have a much better viewpoint of the whole industry, but caring, it's very tough to scale caring, so you really have to take the time and care about your individual members, know who they are, care about them. With the 1,000 people coming to PodFest, I could almost tell you I know 450 of them at least, and by the end of it, I'll try and know up to 700-800 of them.
Right. Well, I attended PodFest last year, so it was my first time being there, and I really got a great feeling from it. Just how you're describing about the community, and seems like everybody knew each other. I felt like. Not an outsider because I felt very comfortable very quickly, but I was just kind of amazed, just relative to my other experience going to conferences where it's like, it really seems like everybody knew each other. It was really like an interesting experience. And I was like, and then, once people got to know me a little bit, they started introducing me, but I was like, wow, this is a very different feeling conference, I think, versus most of them that are out there. And maybe the entrepreneurial part makes it a little bit less competitive and those kind of things, less corporate feeling for sure, but really an interesting feeling to it. So you're doing a good job in that regard for sure. Something different, that you don't see every day or don't experience every day, I would say. So that must be related to the success that you've had. Yeah, very interesting. I got to share this story. You're telling me about how you got started and how that was actually one of the questions on my mind was, you're the founder of PodFest, you're driving this community, but you don't have your own podcast. So that was one of my questions of why didn't you have it? You kind of explained it where it was like when you first got going, you were so busy and doing all these things that it seemed like Katie would be the right person to start the podcast. And obviously it worked out. And you know what stuck out to me when I started getting into podcasting, it's been about a year and a half ago, I guess, since I started this podcast. And before I had no relation to it, I didn't know anything about it. I was just diving into it. And so back in 2016, I found out about Podcast Movement, I guess. It's a larger podcast, more national, I guess. And so it just came up on my radar screen. I was searching out there, so I decided to go. It was in Anaheim in 2016. And I attended one of the sessions, which I think maybe Josh Elledge was chairing. He had a bunch of speakers in there. And I remember there was this woman, female business entrepreneur, that gave this presentation about how she started her podcast and how she grew her audience and now had these sponsors and, tens of thousands of downloads. And I was like looking at her, I'm thinking like, I could barely wrap my head around it because I had like maybe 5 or 6 episodes in and I was really trying to figure out, I was really struggling with it. I'm thinking like, wow, who is this girl? This girl rocks. I mean, and I find out that like, oh, it's Biz Women Rock. It's Katie's podcast. And I just found out later, obviously, and once I started learning more about podcasting that, oh, okay, that she's the other half or better half or whatever of you. And it's like, wow, really a team and really building the community. So I thought that was really cool. She's really stood out to me too, by the way. So a little shout out to Katie.
She just launched Meditation for Women a few months back.
I did not know that. Okay.
She started this other podcast. So Biz Women Rock helps women with their business challenges and, inspires them and gives them really great information.
Right.
She figured, how can I help them subconsciously? And Katie actually created these guided meditations.
Oh, cool.
And now Meditation for Women has become one of the fastest growing podcasts in that space. And she's killing it, man. She's helping so many people. So Katie's just a powerhouse.
She really is. And, after that conference, I know I turned at least 2 or 3 of my friends onto her podcast because I was like, people that are doing business, women that were doing business. So I'm like, you got to check her out because she's just very inspirational. She's very insightful, but she really knows business. She knows how to build stuff. So I thought it was just a great reference point. So that's good to know that. And actually, when I was thinking about having you on, I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I forgot about he's married to Katie, whatever. I got a cool, maybe I can turn her on to some people I know that might be good guests for her show, by the way. So
yeah, she's done a really phenomenal job with their podcast. Since then, I have like 8 different podcasts that I do. I produce most of them, and I have one, but it's been a lot of fun. I just enjoy the medium. I like YouTube. I like podcasting. Anything where you can communicate your message for me is a solid medium that you don't need permission. So you don't need a third party to give you permission to put your voice out there. I just love that.
Right. Well, so you're preempting my next question here. So I'm glad you brought that up because now that you get these organizations going and you realize, oh, I can build community, I'm figuring out how to do it, and you're getting people responding. How do you think about creating this center of expertise in Tampa Bay or now in Orlando, versus other locations that are out there that are obviously very tech-savvy locations like Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston, the tech hubs that are out there, or even New York, I guess, that's coming on these days. Do you feel like this is a struggle for that or an opportunity, or how do you think about it? Because I know you've been successful in doing it. Like people, I think, are starting to understand that there's a lot of podcasters and a lot of technology going on in Orlando or Tampa Bay these days.
Well, you have to understand, Florida as a state is the third most populous state in the union. So there's over 20 million people that live in the state of Florida, and over 127 million people visited the state of Florida last year. So not only do we have the I think we're the third after, I think it's California, Texas, Florida, then New York. So a couple years ago, we passed New York in population, but then we also have 127 million people that visit the state. So it's an international destination. And Orlando, the reason why we chose Orlando for the conference PodFest is we get people from Europe, South America, all over the world. So definitely international conference. Now, the difference is early on I started a group called the Florida Podcasters Association, which is based in Tampa. And to give you an example, Silicon Valley was the first place where technology really blossomed was not Silicon Valley. It was in Boston under MIT's discretion. Okay, the first ever digital art festival was held in Boston, but then Silicon Valley and San Fran caught on and exceeded it thanks to the university systems that were putting out all these really great ideas. But if you go in any city in the country now, they have tech incubators. So I was in San Antonio recently. They have a huge tech incubator there. You go to Orlando, Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, every city Charlotte, North Carolina, any city in the country has a tech incubator. What these tech incubators are many tentacles from Silicon Valley. You have, what you just told me in Cleveland, is leaders in blockchain technology. So it's what I call abundance. Every city should have an area for podcast or YouTuber meetups. I just happen to be early in the cycle to understand. I understood that I could claim the state of Florida, call it Florida Podcasters Association, because there was no other real podcast associations that were going on that were going to be as strong as ours. Our meeting tonight will have 50 to 60 people. I'm running that meeting tonight in a couple hours. So every second Tuesday of the month we meet. What we do is we compare, we do tests. So everybody runs tests. So what I mean by that is if we see a new form of advertising, I'll ask a few of the members to test it out, report back a month later. We have different speakers every month that come in to speak. So it's become a really amazing place. I only charge $10 for people to attend the meeting. I don't believe in free meetings like meetups because then you get people that are not, they're what I call looky-loos or sometimes crumb snatchers, and you really want to steer clear of the crumb snatchers.
Right.
So you want people who want to contribute as much as learn and receive. So we charge $10, which is great. We get people that are committed to what we're doing. And we've helped hundreds of people out of that one little group. And then PodFest is the international side of that, which is helping people all over the world.
Yeah, well, it's really great. And I've seen you post, I think, some Facebook Lives of those meetings as they're happening, right?
Yeah, James Van Pruyen, a couple of the members will stream it live, so we'll post it so people could see. It's just a phenomenal meeting with a lot of great information. Yeah,
it's great to see what's going on down there. It's really cool, man. So you were you're creating many different organizations or many different communities, which is awesome to hear, and it's great to hear that there really are no gatekeepers anymore. As long as you decide just to go out there and do this, and that's, to me, part of the reinvention revolution is, the technologies are changing so quickly and so rapidly, and it's this abundance and opportunity that's happening, but you have to take action. You have to decide that it's going to be for you. You know what I mean? That you don't want to opt out, that you're going to opt in. Like you said, hey, pay the $10 and go. You're going to get a lot out of it, right? And
for what we give for $10, I should be charging. Technically, should be charging like 20 to 30 for the meeting, but I figured $10. I don't want to keep anyone from coming. Right. And then if someone's not willing to pay $10, do you really want them in the room?
Right, exactly. And obviously you have a groundswell, of interest down there too, so that helps. But you have to, opt in and create some space. These are kind of the two topics I've been talking about lately: creating space and opting in. Creating space for new ideas to come into your, business or into your life or into your head, your thought process, and then opting in when they show up,
And Jim, Ohio is a pretty hotbed of meetups for podcasters. There's 3 that I know of.
Right. Well, Dave Jackson is up here locally, so he
does something up there. You got Columbus. There's a meetup. There's a couple up in Ohio, and then the other most active or one that draws the most people is the Nashville one. That, and there's one in Atlanta that Mark Deal does a good job. So there's meetups all over the country. The only difference with ours is we charge for people to attend the meeting. We have an agenda, like we have a flow of how everything works, and it's facilitated to make sure that people are there to learn and grow and monetize. We don't shy away from people wanting to monetize their art. We think you should. I'd rather you make some money than starve.
Absolutely. Well, that's again, it's just part of the flavor and community that you really bring to the party, which I really like. It's it's an independent entrepreneurial sharing kind of feeling, but you're focused on like, hey, let's figure out how to make some revenue too. It's fun and games only for so long. Then you have to like kind of get real and figure out how to monetize and how to get something out of it. Let me ask you another thing about you have all these different groups that you're coordinating and running. How does the stuff that you're doing with your speaking now career, how does it fit into all these things? So I noticed you've been speaking more so, I think, and traveling more so the last few years and speaking about different topics just because your expertise is growing, people are getting to know you. How does that fit in with the overall things that you're doing these days?
So for the 10 years that I did Tampa Bay Business Owners, I always spoke locally, but now I've been getting a lot of great opportunities to speak all over the country. So I talk about the on-demand audio revolution, podcasting. I talk about video. I'll talk about the millennial mindset. I basically have a lot of opinions about technology, how the future is developing. And it just really, through word of mouth, really, people are reaching out to me. And luckily for me, I get quite a few cool speaking gigs around the country. And I'm excited for the opportunities. Now I got 2 books in the works for this year. One is about helping future-proof your business, and the other one is about the concept of starting ugly and not letting perfection or fear or procrastination stand in your way of starting ugly.
Starting ugly, yeah. I like that title. That's a great title.
Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of get out there and do it and kind of learn along the way. Obviously improve and learn along the way, but right, don't let perfection get in the way of progress, I guess. Very cool. Well, is it, so was that a thing that was kind of in your mind that you would want to be a speaker, or, that you thought like, oh, that could be part of my business, or it was just sort of a happenstance that started happening and now it can be part of your outlook?
Well, being a community builder, one of the things I'm really good at is communicating. So I'm an exceptional speaker. So I'm an exceptional communicator of ideas. So when I have the opportunity to have a voice or a platform, unlike a lot of people, they might dread it. I look forward to it. I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's 9 people. The largest group I've ever spoken in front of was 1,000 people. I gave the commencement address at college graduating class. Mm-hmm. It was for, I'd like to say it was Everest University, one of them, but it was really great. You had hundreds of students and then 4 to 5 family members being there, so it was over 1,000 people right. In there, and it was really cool. So I just love communicating ideas. And if you've ever done a commencement speech, you might think you're there to say something that will inspire them, but at the end of the day, they're graduating and they're excited for graduating. So that was one thing I like about speaking is you have to figure out who your audience is, and sometimes you have to scrap your whole presentation and come up with something on the fly that'll work for that audience. So there is a stand-up nature to it, and that you have to read the audience and be really good at communicating messages. At FinCon, which you were at, mm-hmm. I spoke at the Ignite. They had the 5-minute Ignite talks.
Oh, yes, I saw that, yeah.
And I applied for that, not thinking, I thought, whatever, 20, 30 people will be part of it. I had no idea that it was an after-hours event that everybody goes to, and there was like 500 people in the room. So really, that one got me a little nervous because 5-minute talks are very difficult to deliver and hit the mark with your slides being auto-played. Luckily, I've had practice now. I've done those a couple times, so that went over really well. So that I just love the challenge of presenting ideas and motivating audiences to make a difference in their life.
Right. You know what? I'm remembering that, and it was a great presentation. And one of the things in there, I'm trying to remember exactly what all the topics were in the 5 minutes you covered. Did you cover the messengers in that, the documentary?
Yeah, I covered the documentary about podcasting. And how yes, it was about.
I just wanted to have an excuse to bring up the messengers. So let's talk about that for a second. I just wanted to bring it up because when I went to PodFest, which was last year, you guys had a screening of The Messengers. And The Messengers is a documentary that that you produced, and you can tell me about the team and people who helped you produce it. But I thought it really was phenomenal. That it's a documentary that gets across the power and impact and community building aspects that podcasting brings to the party. And I thought it was really awesome. I mean, it's like I got chills kind of watching it, and so people should know about it. So tell everyone about Messengers, the documentary.
Yeah, it's called The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and that is up on Apple, as well as if you're an Amazon Prime user, it's free for you to watch. But it's a really great movie. Do you know how we got the title, Jim? Do you remember that story?
No, I don't.
So we had no working title, and I did a brainstorming, because in order to crowdfund something and have something, you need to call it something. The problem with the movie is you don't necessarily have the title till you start the artistic project. So It's kind of like, when do you get the title? So I had some business friends, and we did a brainstorming session, and they told me that I should call it a podcast documentary. And I said, why just a podcast documentary? They said, well, it's a search engine optimization rich. Someone searches it, it'll come up. Okay. So then me and my director, Neil Gilarte, both looked at each other and were like, that does not inspire us to make a movie called a podcast documentary.
Right, hardly.
So we walked out. Neil's like, don't worry about it, man. We'll do some interviews, and the name will hit us. And the first interview we did was of Lee Silverstein, who has We Have Cancer podcast. Lee's a stage 4 colon cancer survivor, and he has a podcast talking to people that are dealing with cancer, living with it, thriving. And while I was doing the interview, I said, Lee, I don't really know what a podcaster is, but you don't look like a podcaster to me. If there was a prototype, what do you consider yourself? And he leaned in, stared at me, and he goes, I consider myself a messenger. For people, I hear those 3 words. You have cancer. And then when the taping was done, I said to Neil, my director, I said, you realize what just happened? He goes, what? Is it time for lunch? I go, no. We just found the title. I go, we just found the title for our movie. He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, what? I go, The Messengers, a podcast documentary. And that's how we got the name of the movie.
Perfect.
So it means a lot, because anyone that's a podcaster, we believe, has some kind of message they want to put out to the world. So all podcasters are messengers. Right.
Well, I totally agree. And it really made it, like putting my own podcast together, it's this creative endeavor, and it's kind of a lonely process, because you have to, you decide what the focus of it is. You decide what the title is, what the artwork is going to look like. It's sort of this personal thing, and you realize it's kind of a little bit lonely, and you realize, why am I doing this? It really kind of forces you to be a little bit more introspective, and you realize, because I do have a message. I people need to, in this case, need to learn about technology, have their mind open, and be willing to reinvent themselves, kind of going forward. That's the message, So I think it's a perfect title, and I really loved it, man. You know what? I went out to get coffee this morning early. I ran out of creamer, so I had to go to the stores up early. And I'm walking back into the house, and I'm thinking okay, I'm going to talk to Chris today, whatever. And images from The Messenger started flooding back into my mind, thinking about, man, what a cool thing that you did and put that documentary together. So, people listening out there, if you haven't discovered it yet, go check it out, because it's really interesting. And you'll probably get, if you haven't gotten already, the idea of podcasting. If you're listening to this, obviously you get the idea. But if you're trying to turn your friends onto it, or even try to turn other business opportunities onto the impact that podcasting can have for them, it's definitely a great thing to check out. So cool, man. Well, thanks for going over that. So thinking about podcasting and technology in general, and from your point of view and the things you've been speaking about and thinking about lately, do you see any particular trends for 2019 that are coming down the pike that people should be thinking about or focusing on?
I follow Trend Hunter. That's probably a good place to look for trends. But podcasting, branded podcasts are definitely a trend, meaning, podcasts with advertisers. You're going to see a lot of influencer education. So people want to learn from the influencers. So you want to be an influencer. A lot of these smart devices are taking hold, and we're going to see them get a lot smarter by the end of this year. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people are kind of fooled by like, oh, they're not that smart. Yeah, they're not yet. Pretty soon the smart devices, instead of us talking to them, they're going to prompt us. So they're going to talk to us. So they'll say, hey, good morning, Jim. Would you like me to turn on the lights? And you're like, yeah, please turn on the lights. Or, hey, good morning, Jim. Would you like me to start breakfast? Amazon already has a smart Alexa-enabled microwave that they've been selling for some time. So a lot of these smart devices are making it into the kitchen. We're going to see personal assistants be replaced fairly quickly. Google has already have the prototype of a personal assistant that makes appointments, checks on stuff. So everybody, what used to be for executives and successful business people, everybody will have their own personal assistant doing their bidding. So that'll save a lot of time.
Right.
So what all that does, Jim, is it frees up time for us to focus on the tasks that we really want to focus on. And it's going to unleash a lot of output. That output is going to basically transform the way we all live. So, a lot of that energy is going to be released into entrepreneurial endeavors, health care, all kinds of stuff. So the quality of life is going to increase tremendously. Supercomputing is out.
Right.
The age of computing, Jim, that you and I know is known as the classical age. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you follow technologists, they call the age of computing we grew up with as the classical age. The new age is the age of supercomputing. I'm sorry, it's not it's called quantum computing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's what I thought.
And those computers are 200 to 300 million times faster than the fastest computer we have on Earth today. And they have to cool them down to below 200 degrees, something insane. So there's a lot of good with it, and there's a lot of scary stuff with it, because it's the governments that understand the arms race is not in weapons but in technology and artificial intelligence. That's the scary side of it. The only thing we can do as human beings is let's find the good in what we can do and hope that the geniuses like Elon Musk of the world and their friends are counteracting any negative threat that might be going on with it.
Right. Well, that's the benefit of. I know people get nervous with like the Amazons and of the world that where technology is moving fast and it's making these large corporations, but we have to remember that that helps us security wise too. In terms of having those smart brains and us having the leading edge of creating that technology. We've got a few minutes left, and this technology discussion leads into my. One of my three final questions for you, and that is, with all this technology changing so quickly and so rapidly, and disrupting business models and disrupting kind of real human experience with now you're shopping online and not going to the mall or staring at your phone all day, etc. Is there something about technology that for you that gives you pause or makes you think like or that something that you really struggle with these days?
The challenge is it's been created to be addictive, so it's nurturing the addictive part of our brains. Mm-hmm. Like my 3-year-old, we gave her a Kindle. There's a little Kindle version for the kids, so they could watch Daniel Tiger and Umi Zumi, all these little Nickelodeon and PBS and Disney type shows. The challenge is you can't rip it out of their fingers because they start flipping out. Right. Now, luckily for us, the machine, the charger wasn't working. So we weaned her off of it because it just gets very scary how addictive kids can get to this stuff. So you really have to have limits to the screen time. And then for adults, I love social media. So this is coming from someone that uses it all the time. But I think we need to have breaks to purge ourselves, and it could be something as simple as okay, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to leave the car, the phone in the car. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go for a walk. Because we don't realize it, but if you look around, you'll see people in their cars. They're looking at their phones. You'll see people walking. They're looking at their phones. I was walking around yesterday with Katie, my wife, and people were walking outside their homes, and I would look at them because I'm walking on the street, oh, look at that, and they're not even looking at me. They're looking at their phones all the way into their car. Right. So you just gotta think about that, and you gotta understand that there's a time and place for all of that. And I don't know. I'm optimistic that we'll solve it, but I was just watching a clip on the Joe Rogan show, and they had a gentleman going over depression rates and suicide rates are skyrocketing for Generation Z, the one right behind the millennials, and the gentleman attributes it to social media on the phones for tweens, for the middle school ages. Really? And it's really impacting girls because they harass each other online aggressively in a different way than boys would. Actually, and the computer is actually having a not necessarily a good effect, but more positive on boys because they play video games and they don't really they don't rag on each other in a bullying way through the internet as much. They're more physically confrontational in person, the gentleman was saying. So, but it doesn't, these games are addictive and there's just a lot of things going on. So we're living in a very tumultuous age. Dan Carlin said it best at that Harvard symposium. People were really upset because under the age of Trump, whether you like him or not, the pot has been stirred up. You have social justice warriors. You have all these things going on, right? And he goes, Dan Carlin says, people always say they want to live during interesting times. He goes, I have news for you guys. You're living in interesting times.
Right.
How does it feel? And you could feel the tension in the room, like, oh man, it sucks, you know. He's like, well, you guys always study history. You're living in an interesting time right now. We're not afraid for our lives per se in general, but there's all these things and ideas. Everything's under attack right now, and social media. So we're living in interesting times, and it comes with a lot of challenges. I think we'll work it through. My job is a voice of reason to help people understand that they could achieve greatness within these interesting times if they focus on that and not get paralyzed by the fear of it.
Right. Well, I love that message, and that's absolutely part of why I'm doing the podcast here today. So awesome. Well, in thinking about all, and you bring up some great points about all this, the addictive nature, behavior nature to all these things. But as we're going forward, my next question is, how do you keep your mind wrapped around all this stuff? How do you keep your mind open to continuing to discover and continuing to be interested in figuring out the technology? Because it's so overwhelming at times that I think people just kind of, go home at night and, crawl themselves up into a little ball and cry themselves to sleep at night, because they're like, oh my God, another app, another piece of technology, another social media network to figure out, how do you think about it? How do you keep your mind open to it?
So the mediums that I really gravitate towards, YouTube and podcasting, are actually long form mediums. And what I mean by that is they're not like Twitter. Twitter is like an instant feedback loop. Like, let me put something out there and see if I could get a fix. Facebook has that as well. But if you look at podcasting, what you're doing, Jim, is long form in that, your audience will grow slowly over time, and you'll build something as you learn from it. And you could get out points in a long form format. Same thing with YouTube, believe it or not. A lot of the really successful YouTube creators, yes, they have to make their videos interesting, and yes, they have to have really high-end editing, but they are able to present a point across. And many of those videos that people watch nowadays are 8 to 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 18 minutes long. So I gravitate towards those forums. I'm not a big fan of the instant gratification of stuff. So what I would tell people is tackle a platform, learn it, be really good at it, and then just keep your eyes out for what other avenues might help you. Right now for Katie, with her meditation for women, we found that Instagram is a really great place for her to be. So that one podcast tends to have a huge Instagram following, but she's not doing much else other than Instagram with it for now to drive traffic. So just pick and choose your battles. Don't get overwhelmed. I go for walks. I used to go for walks at sunset, but now with 2 children, one is a month old, the other one's 3. I get up around 5 or 6 a.m. and I go for walks early in the morning before they get up. And I'm able to spend an hour by myself, usually walking by the water and just thinking of ideas. And if I'm really in a good flow, I'll start talking out loud. So if you don't know me, you think I'm nuts. I'm talking to myself. But I'm working out ideas, and I'm working out concepts, and I'm visualizing them. And then the other part of it, if I'm not doing that, I'm just enjoying nature and just enjoying and being grateful for what I have.
Right. Well, I think it's a great idea. Like, the more intense we have with technology, intensity that we have, I think we have to balance it out with some of that space, quiet time, getting back to nature. So I think it's a great thing that you've kind of probably naturally found yourself doing these days. Really cool. So for my final question for you here is, through all this explosion of community and technology and conferences and speaking, you've really kind of reinvented your whole network down in Florida, so to speak. Can you share with us like a reinvention revelation, that's something that you wouldn't have predicted or wouldn't have known about yourself or about business that you've discovered along the way?
Yeah, three things. I didn't know I was a phenomenal speaker till I was given the opportunity to speak. And that was when I moved here. I had bought some real estate and then I sold it really quickly through this auction method I kind of read about and then developed. And a friend of mine said, "Would you like to speak?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Have you ever done it?" I said, "No." He said, "Are you good at it?" I said, "I'm not sure. We'll see."
Right.
And he and I laughed. He was the promoter and he was really nervous at the time. But I did a phenomenal job. I was like the early bird speaker before like the big California speaker came in. After I was done speaking, when the other guy started, 40% of the audience left.
Oh,
and my friend who was the promoter said he's never seen that before. So that's when I knew I was like, okay, I have an exceptional gift. So I developed that in Florida. Didn't really know, maybe I thought I had it. What I didn't realize I was really good at was connecting people and collaborating and creating community. And I learned that when I used to do 2 live TV shows in 05, 06. And what I would do, one was called Millionaire Mindset. So it was for business owners and really successful entrepreneurs. I'd feature them. I would stack my segments with entrepreneurs that I thought should meet each other. And during the commercial breaks, I would introduce them. 6 months later, they would tell me, "Hey, Gary and I are doing business. Thank you for the connection." And after it started happening 4, 5, 6 times over, I'm like, oh, I'm really good at connecting people. So I realized I had that gift. It goes so far as I've connected people and they've gotten married and stuff. So I'm a really good connector in connecting energy and connecting people. Mm-hmm. So it's a skill set I realized I had. And then for live events, so at my own live events, Jim, you probably noticed this, I don't really speak at my own live events. I'm busy facilitating the experience.
Right.
So you'll see me MC, right? But you won't see me like doing a PowerPoint and speaking. And it's because I love creating a platform and watching other people shine. So I've developed a really unique gift of empowering other people and watching them succeed. And I do it by creating my own platforms where I could then give them the platform to help others. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of 3 unique gifts I figured out along the way that I've developed. And that's why I'm uniquely qualified at doing live events and bringing people together because of those 3 unique gifts.
Well, Chris, here's another gift I think that you have. Like just listening to you speak is you have a real gift of this self-awareness about what you're good at and you're willing to embrace it. That's kind of what I hear in your voice. And, some people might think like that you're bragging or that you're, trying to sell somebody something. But I really feel like you're so authentic and so self-aware about like, oh my gosh, I'm actually good at this. This is what I need to do. And I can confirm it all. So because of my experience of going to PodFest and interacting with you a little bit. And like I said, he's a great speaker. So people that are listening out there, if you're looking for someone to speak at their conference, I would never hesitate to get in touch with Chris. And by the way, do you know about Content Marketing World? Do you know that conference?
Is that the one in Cleveland?
Yes.
Yeah, I know Dave went out to it. I wasn't able to check it out.
Okay. So I'm just thinking about it. I'm thinking of, maybe if there's some connection there, if anybody listening out there that isn't connected with that one, maybe think about Chris to bring you up, I
appreciate that. But here's something I want to really, something I've learned recently. And it's you have to be confident in yourself and the skills that you bring to the table. Because what I have found is there's people that are what I call delusional and they're in their confidence.
Right.
And they will actually, if you're not confident, they will sell you and convince you otherwise, and you'll put yourself in a backseat position, which I've done in the past.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there that are really good at what they do, but I question how can I be better, right? And that's part of being self-aware of like, okay, sure. I delivered that. What could I have done better? But I would challenge people in that to own what you're really great at. I get that we're all improving on it, because you need to own that space, because there's other people out there that are really not that good at all, but they've convinced themselves otherwise. Like, for instance, I've done 2,000 events. Like, I not only have I walked the walk, but I've literally 10 years and 2,000 events. I've learned a lot in that space.
Right.
So for those of you that have put in the time, own it, because if you don't, some other person that's done one event is going to tell you they're better at doing what you do, that you've been doing for a lifetime, So it's just something I've learned over the course of time.
Right. Wow, that experience is coming through loud and clear, so I love it. I love that message. So
thanks, Jim.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show. If people are interested in getting in touch with you or interested in PodFest, et cetera, where would you send them, or where do you want them to go?
So chriskrimitsos.com, put it into Google, they'll spell it correctly for you, or go to podfestexpo.com. And, you could email me directly, or I'll get messages on Twitter at Chris Krimitsos, or chris@podfestexpo.com. Feel free to reach out to me. Jim, thanks for having me on the show. Hope to see you sooner than later.
Okay, well, yeah, I really appreciate it. Hopefully I will make it to PodFest this year. We'll see, because I'll be coming back from Asia, and if I'm not burnt out from traveling.
How long are you going to be in Asia?
Probably 5 or 6 weeks.
Oh, wow, that's going to be amazing. Send me some pictures.
Yeah, I will be posting some stuff on Facebook for sure. And, I'm trying to I'll be in Chiang Mai for a week or two, and then a little bit over Thailand. I'm going to Philippines with someone I meet because of my podcast. So someone that I'm trying to do some business with, she might sponsor the podcast. So I'm going to meet her in the Philippines. She happens to be Filipina. And then maybe hit Australia for a little vacation time on the way back and visit some relatives. So that's what I'm
Congratulations.
Yeah, so it should be fun. Anyways, thanks for being on again. I'll have all that information in the show notes for people that are looking for links and your contact info. Thanks again for being on.
All right, thanks, Jim.
Thank you for listening to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more, join our mailing list at jimjimsreinventionrevolution.com. See you next time, and remember, the revolution has just begun. So dig in, embrace the process of reinvention, and start realizing the success you've always dreamed of. Hey, revolutionaries, if you enjoyed today's episode and today's guest, let them know by commenting on their Facebook page, finding their Twitter handle or Instagram feed, and letting them know you heard them on Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, and tell them what you got out of the episode, what you really liked, or how they inspired you. I know they would get a kick out of it and will help others find the same value that you found.